So, I mean, in sort of jumping off of Malika, since we just heard from you, I just wanted to hear a little bit from you about, like, what do you think kind of helped you turn things around or sort of change your trajectory? I mean, things are obviously going in a different direction now, and to what would you be saying to the folks in the room about what's most important to ensure the success of other young people?
Can you hear me? Yes, it's on. I want to be very clear. The court system was not the reason why I changed my life around. Point blank, period. The reason why I changed my life around is because, although with being in the court system, I was able to identify caring adults. I was able to identify where it is that I needed the help, what kind of support I needed, who could help me with that, and then find that by myself. Not many people can do that, but I was able, with the help of folks like, I'm going to nominate Miss Simone Fuller out here in the red if you don't see her, and Tara Lewis. I had caring mentors who kind of helped me try to shift my direction. And then could you repeat the second part of your question, please?
And just, I was going to say, what do you think for other young people could really help them sort of ensure their success? To what extent have you kind of heard things that you could share with this audience that would be helpful for those folks?
All my young people all the young people that I directly serve had said, the only thing, if anything, when I do, it's not a crime, but whenever I am patrolling or if I, got in trouble or whatever, one is to hear my side, for sure, hear the reasons, ask me the right questions, I guess, is what they really wanted to say. What happened doesn't really work because you don't get the full story. Asking me my story was definitely the real thing, because many of the time something has happened prior to them being in that space that required them to be in that space. And then the second thing was support. I will always or continue to go back to that. They said if I had support or if I had a support system, I probably wouldn't be sitting in front of you to start with. So if you're able to help me with things like that, if you're able to train, my school resource officers to be more like counselors and probably not carry their weapon, or if you provide me with the social workers, maybe our counselors aren't all driven for high school and prior high school life. Can they help me with my life now? So yeah, definitely.
Great. So I just wanted to turn to some of our panelists, and I think, obviously hearing Malika it's very powerful. But obviously sometimes making the kinds of changes that we're talking about, depending on where you stand in the sort of system, can be difficult, and it's not always straightforward to get the kind of buy-in that you want. And, I'm sort of maybe speaking specifically to you, Chief Earl, and to you, Judge Beyer, in your state in particular, how were you able to really get the kind of buy-in that you needed to not resort to something like detention? And what were some of the barriers or things that people were saying to not take on this approach? And then how did you convince them?
I just bullied them No, I didn't. Well, maybe a little. Okay, so what I didn't have a chance to talk about, which I'll do very briefly, is this. When kids were coming to court, and I started on the bench in 1996, yeah, I'm that old, in 1996, and kids were coming in, and I'd say, okay, well, when you come back, make sure you've gone to school. And what I realized, it was really a waste of time. It was a waste of the child's time. It was a waste of the family's time, the parent or their caregiver that was not at work because, we don't do courts, after hours. And the kid wasn't in school because they were in court. And long story short, I developed a program with a representative from our public schools. In our county, we have 100,000 kids in our unified, so 100,000 plus in our unified school district, where the judges, myself and other judges, were going into the schools with the help of the school personnel, identifying kids that were struggling with attendance. And we put together a team that would help not just this child, so mentors, mental health counselors, academic supports from community resources from within the building, but we also treated the family as a whole. And so we developed this judicially led program to help the pockets of school these kids, and it was a wonderful program, and it is a wonderful program that spread both statewide throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky as well as throughout the country through the assistance of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and other judges picked up this concept that, punishing and, embarrassing and humiliating children does not change behaviors. And we know that the kids often, just by virtue of their age, they may have been abused and neglected 2 years ago. They were in court as children abused and neglected. Then they now their behaviors are related to the non-school attendance, and ultimately they may see a visit in the delinquency side. Which is interesting because as a status kid, you believe nothing of what the child says and everything of what the parent says, and then you get to delinquency, and now you only believe the parents. Now you believe the parents, where before, when they were the abusers, you never believed them. It's a crazy system. So my answer, my lawyer long answer to your question, I apologize, is this: you have to blow it up. You have to stop doing what isn't working. You have to bring around the people that will support that. You have to step over the people that won't. You can only sell it by successes and stories of positive things that have happened. I've had several kids in my truancy programs that have gone to law school. I have a wonderful filmmaker in Louisville who was in one of my programs. He had 62 days tardy by the time I met with him, and he now does wonderful filmmaking in and outside of Louisville. So we have to believe the kids can achieve. We have to look for the positives in them and strength-based, and focus on what they do well and work around what they don't.
And Chief Farrell, can you talk a little bit about getting sort of police officer buy-in? I know that can often be sometimes a challenge depending on, where you are and what communities you're dealing with. So.
Yeah, thank you. When we started about 5 years ago, it was a very big challenge, even to the Gloucester County Police Department. So when I announced that we were hiring a social worker, honestly, the reaction from a lot of the police officers were like, this guy's lost his mind, this chief. He's been a chief a year, and he's hiring a social worker. We should be hiring cops. And but I like what the judge said. You really just had to keep going. Fortunately, when you're in the position, and you need the chief to make these kinds of changes, because if you don't have the chief, it's not really going to be effective in police agencies, kind of the paramilitary. But 2-3 years later, and certainly now, the officers now go to the social worker with their own kind of personal problems on the side. My kids haven't, what do you think about this? And so it's like now that it really worked, and it's become part of the department. And there's still some obstructionism from time to time. But ultimately, perseverance, I think, kept it going. As far as outside agencies and other police departments, I've seen the intensely great and the intensely bad. Some police chiefs don't even want to hear it, don't even want to talk about it. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, whatever. That's somebody else's problem. And then I have other chiefs that want to do everything that we've implemented and can't do it fast enough. And the best do is try to show them that it works and give them encouragement.
Great. And I know, all of you have sort of mentioned, and obviously Malika as well, sort of talked a little bit about schools and kind of how they functioned within this context, since often, you are getting a lot of referrals from schools. Can you just talk about how you've sort of built relationships at that level? Because I do think, given how high the percentage of truancy referrals are nationally and probably in some cases locally, I think that can be one of those key things that bringing those folks on board and sort of a collaborative effort is really important. I'm sure Julie can speak to that too. We're talking about schools and kind of being able to bring them on board into the reform, especially when truancy makes up such a large proportion of these cases, and how you've sort of really done that. So if you want to talk about that, Julie.
I'm sorry to have stepped out. I'm battling a cold here, and so I didn't want to cough. So excuse me for that. Yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, the schools, they're eager to re-engage their kids, and yet they're trying to focus on education. They turn to the court system and say, use the heavy hand of the court to, insist on compliance. And, so I think they know that's an imperfect solution, but they feel helpless and powerless, and so they're looking where they can to gain the supports they can. we know that the likelihood, I think as the judge said, if someone isn't going to school, they've probably been told a million times by parents, by school officials, you need to. So now a court system, a judge, a probation officer saying that same message, you must go to school, is really unlikely to change the behavior. But then we end up, through graduated sanctions, sort of consequenting kids until they are so entrenched in a system that exposes them to other kids who are already, facing challenges, and sometimes who have less motivation to change than they do, and so their exposure and their social group can become other kids who are in some trouble. So, as we consider removing defiance of school rules and truancy as status offenses, we're left with the problem, how then will the schools be supported in ensuring that the kids come? And we are contemplating strategies like, well, what if there were greater legislation to youth service bureaus and other pro-social community groups like that keep communities responsible for their own kids, envelop and support them, take the kids who we might call troublemakers and put them in groups and activities and clubs alongside of the high achievers so that the social influence is positive. And if we're not able to go quite that far, then our next best option will probably be really stepping up, because some schools are terrific and other schools, from my observation, may be quicker to engage a court system than they should be. So we want to make sure that the schools are really exercising every option to engage the kids before they call in the courts.
Great. And I also just wanted to hear about from all of you, because you've now sort of lived with your reforms for a bit of time. Sometimes you hear about reforms that get started, but then they kind of fall apart once that one person or two people who started it leave. So what are some of the strategies you've now sort of been employing to help sustain your approach and the commitment of the public, or whoever the funder is per se, to keep this going over the long term?
Sustainability on prevention programs is really hard. Historically, it's based on, here's a grant to do this, and then the money runs out, or there's one person that's the driver, the champion for children, and that person gets tired or retires or moves to another job. And so I think the question is, are you in the process of doing this, whatever you're doing, whether it's a court program, whether it's a police program, you have to, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, you have to develop systems change that live longer than you do. And you have to continue to educate how and make sure that the next person doesn't fall back on what I would say are old habits. And so in Kentucky, for example, a recent bill, Senate Bill 200, is an approach taken to provide services by a team to groups of kids involved in the system, mandatory by different groups. So we're looking at education, and I really do believe, more than anything, especially regarding court-involved youth, that the drivers must be the judicial officers. We must be the ones to stand out there, because unfortunately, when we call a meeting, you show up. Or unfortunate for you, good for us. Being drivers of change is really an obligation of judicial officers. And I think it takes one to talk to another, to talk to a police officer, to talk to superintendents. I mean, I don't have any problem. I could call my superintendent in my district now on her cell phone, because there's that type of relationship. And you've got to believe, I used to think that if the schools knew that the courts weren't doing anything, they wouldn't refer kids to court. And what I think is sometimes many schools are so overwhelmed that they just have to check the box that they did that, because they've given up on kids. And we've got to stop. We've got to set a community precedent that these are all our community's kids and bring in all the resources. So it's really the establishment of systems change that lives longer than the person pushing, kicking. I'd say, sort of you just do it. I mean, that's what the chief said. You can't listen to people say, oh, those kids don't deserve it. It'll never work. It works, and you just have to keep, and then you have to, if you're going to step down or move away, you have to identify the next person that's going to be the champion for kids, and they're out there.
Great. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that, Chief?
I think that we've launched our program as a community policing initiative, and that's a buzzword now. It really is. It's a shame because there's so much greatness about it, and so we've been really doing that since 2010 and developing these programs and make them work. But encourage you to follow us on social media, even though we're probably from a distance from you. But we push out very heavily, so we feel sustainability will be the community just demands it. Like, it's just become part of our fabric of our township that this is the way youth are treated. And if it goes away, people are going to be upset. So that's kind of one of the plans to make sure that happens. And we're starting to see that be contagious. So other town leaders are now saying to their police departments, well, why don't you guys have a junior police academy and the kids come back, and we just had graduates come back for Martin Luther King Service Day. So these are what we're doing to build a relationship with youth that really works. And now other towns are saying, well, why aren't you doing that? So that, one, helps our sustainability, and two, helps, I think, spread the work.
Great. So I want to make sure we have, I don't know if we have time to take a few questions, so maybe we can turn to the audience. So over here.
My name's Adrian Jacobs. I'm representing the Senate Budget Committee here, and I know several of us here are also representing members of Congress or their offices for this presentation. And my question for you is, what can we go back to our offices telling our superiors, what can the federal government do? Because this, from every perspective, it seems like a very city-run or state-run program that you've initiated, and but you're here sitting in the federal government. So what can the federal government do to make your jobs and lives easier on this matter?
We have got to reauthorize JJDPA. It has to happen. There's your federal answer as far as I'm concerned. It provides training for judges. It gets rid of the valid court order exception over time. It promotes enforcement of or encouragement of other resources. From a federal level, as a judge, this is Judge Joan talking here. From my involvement with the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, I'm not here to lobby, I'm here to tell you that. That is what you tell your folks. That's what I told them when I was on the Hill a month ago. That's what I said when I was on the Hill 6 months ago. And I said, that is what has to happen. We can't make adult justice reform and not change and support juvenile justice reform. There you go. There's the message. Get it out, fund it, and move it. Well, it's unconscionable, and I really mean that. It is unconscionable not to take care of the youth in our country.
And back in the back.
I wanted to ask you, you made a very good point about the role that parents play in their children's issues that they have going into the school system. What plans do you guys have as far as the miscommunication between the parent and the child moving forward to kind of like make sure that these cycles don't happen again? Because a lot of times parents suffer from the same things that they're allowing their children to suffer. And that ends up becoming a cycle constantly over and over.
Yeah, it's a great point. So when I mentioned that one program that we have called GT Focus, it's a 6-week program that first-time offending youth go to, and it's held within our community. And they actually do not have a juvenile record as a result of going to that. It's diverted. But what happens is the parents have to come for 2 of those sessions. And Michelle, the social worker that works at the police department, describes it best, that the parents sit there intensely angry the first night. They are so angry that they have to be here. And second time they come around, and then they come back a third and fourth time, even though they didn't have to. Because all of a sudden they start to realize, oh, you mean you're here to help me how to deal with my child and deal with my own problems, because they're actually separated. The parents are separated. There's two social workers that come that evening, and they're separated. So now they start to engage with the parent about what's going on, and the parents have a lot of issues that were never addressed. So that's one small way that we try to address those needs. And the needs are large. I mean, I was going to say about help. I think sometimes, no matter what community you're in, there's this, no matter the demographics, there are a lot of problems facing parents and youth, no matter where they live. And we see that firsthand. It's amazing what's going on behind people's homes that look very, very intact, but they aren't. So I hope that answered your question. But the parents are a big piece. We try to address it whenever we can.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Julie, if you wanted to comment.
I just wanted to add to that, in Connecticut, we've invested in a number of evidence-based family-focused in-home programs. And these are programs where parenting skills are as much or more the target of intervention as the kids' behavior, with the premise that by increasing problem solving, parents' sort of monitoring of the kids' whereabouts and movements and so forth, and really just frankly increasing warmth, because lots of kids don't get enough warmth and love at home. We can affect children's behavior by affecting parents' behavior. In Connecticut, we believe that our investment in family-focused interventions has helped to reduce the court intake because younger siblings have been diverted from court involvement.